Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Emma Vigeland did another appearance on MSNBC on this sort of roundtable show they do. I guess this is like an over the weekend kind of show. And she has appeared a couple times. I covered the last time where she was talking to Democrats about how they need to, get their shit together, essentially, if they want to win over their base. And she was back on MSNBC fleshing out that message a little bit more, talking both about Gavin Newsom and what he's doing with redistricting in California, as well as the dynamic between Hakeem Jefferies and Zohran Mamdani in New York. So, two pretty key issues when it comes to Democratic leadership going on. You've got Gavin Newsom taking pretty bold steps to counter Republican redistricting, which is something that needs to be done. It's him showing a little bit of the attitude that we need to see from Democrats. And on the other side, you have Hakeem Jefferies, who is ostensibly the leader of the Democratic Party, and yet he is continually hedging. He's continually playing this centrist game of hide and seek, where he wants the general Democratic Party to have a center of gravity. That is, I guess, where he is positioned. But he doesn't have any ideas. He doesn't have any proposals. And it seems like the best idea that he has put himself behind when it comes to Democratic opposition to Donald Trump is to play dead. So, I mean, that's the best that this guy has to offer. And I will say the play dead strategy is showing that it doesn't have zero merit, because Donald Trump and the Republicans are, in fact, self-destructing. However, clearly, the base of Democrats, the American people in general, they want somebody who's going to show that they're willing to fight to preserve some of these institutions that Donald Trump is destroying. People who didn't vote at all, even some people who voted for Donald Trump. I think if you showed some serious contention with the things that Donald Trump is doing that will affect all of us negatively and are already, a lot of people are going to be behind that. So anyway, Emma Vigeland is on MSNBC trying to push the Democrats to adopt a more working class friendly message. It is the writing on the wall. It's what's right in front of their face. First, she's talking about the redistricting effort with Gavin Newsom, and then it cuts to a clip of her talking about Hakeem Jefferies and Zohran Mamdani. And then I'll talk a little bit about the dynamics going on there, as well as getting into the specifics of how this split up between Comcast and NBC Universal is going to work, which is basically going to lead to a rebrand of MSNBC. So I mentioned last time Emma Vigeland was on that, having more progressive voices, people who are willing to call the genocide in Gaza a genocide, onto the programming in MSNBC is a good sign, but it's also a little bit of a worrying sign, because at a certain point, these progressive messages get co-opted, and it really just depends on what the machine is using you for. But you can also use the machine for a certain amount of good. And there is some question in the air about what this split between these companies is going to lead to in terms of the political leaning of MSNBC, or MS Now, as the rebrand is going to be. So we'll get into all that later, but first let's watch a couple clips of Emma Vigeland here.
Until there is some sort of federal independent commission that mandates this and standardizes it across the country, there's no reason that Democrats should be unilaterally disarming here. There was a Brennan Center, I think, analysis at the end of 2024 that showed that due to gerrymandering, there are an additional 16 seats that are more favorable to Republicans in Congress, and Democrats have to respond in kind, because quite literally our democracy is at stake here. But I will say that it can't just be this kind of partisan fight. If the Democrats want to take the next step, they have to pair this with an agenda that puts working people to the forefront. Because we saw the resistance was effective in Trump 1.0 and thwarting him in many ways, but it was short-lived and not durable because the Democrats didn't coalesce around a positive vision that harnessed this populist anger towards the elites by basically saying, we're going to tax billionaires and we're going to make your life better, whether it be via universal childcare, universal health care, et cetera. And I think a winning message in 2028 is going to be the person that says, you see your tax dollars going to the genocide in Gaza. I'm going to make sure that your tax dollars go to improving your life materially.
It's a fascinating issue about affordability in this city, and whether there are folks who are living in rent-controlled apartments all across this city that effectively should be going towards poor people who need that affordability.
It's a legitimate issue that has been raised, and the Mamdani campaign is going to have to address it.
I mean, what happened to vote blue no matter who? Right. I mean, what happened? I was told that. And then as somebody who is a registered Democrat but was supportive of Bernie Sanders both times he ran, I can't tell you the amount of times that was shouted at us. And many of us did. An overwhelming majority of Bernie supporters did end up supporting the nominee. So this is a very unfortunate thing that Hakeem Jefferies is doing for his own political career, frankly, because in that primary, which was the largest turnout in the history of New York City mayoral primaries, Zohran Mamdani won in Hakeem Jefferies' own district by double digits, by around 12 points. So this is just basically a siren call for anybody in DSA or anybody who is closely associated with Zohran Mamdani to primary Hakeem Jefferies in his own district. I think that's going to be happening also in Dan Goldman's district, et cetera. What people don't understand, I think, about the pro-Palestine issue is that it's a litmus test for folks. If you can be brave and stand up against this genocide, then we can trust you on a variety of different issues. And Zohran didn't win in spite of his pro-Palestine position. He won a majority of Jewish voters because of it. Yeah. And that is what Jeffries is incapable of responding to as somebody who takes money from AIPAC. And it's why Democratic leadership is bogging down this party right now. We need a change in leadership, because if you can't harness this energy right now, you are basically saying we don't care if Donald Trump wins over and over again and this authoritarian takeover continues, because they're rejecting grassroots energy in favor of donors, and that's the core of the problem right now.
All right, so great performance from Emma Vigeland here. She does do well on these shows. You could tell that her message was really sharpened. She really focused a lot on the idea that Democrats' message needs to serve the working class. That's their only hope. And in order to do so, they have to detach themselves from entities like AIPAC. So, you know, to get all of that out on the platform of MSNBC is enormously valuable. And they are more welcoming towards these conversations now. I mean, pretty much everybody sitting on this panel, at least three of the people here, openly referred to what is happening in Gaza as a genocide and discussed it from that perspective. And it's just, that's not the kind of coverage you were getting on MSNBC, not that long ago. And my understanding was that Joy Ann Reid was fired for her coverage to the same effect. Now, maybe that was exaggerated or there were other reasons behind that. What it probably is that companies have a way of getting rid of the person who's making noise and then course correcting anyway, because they'd rather you be gone and right than keep you around and have you be the one who steered the ship in the right direction. I think big companies have a natural reflex to avoid being disciplined by their own employees in that way. And so maybe the fact is that Joy Ann Reid got the brunt of that. I'm skeptical of MSNBC's, sudden openness towards this message, although it is a good thing. And you see it a little bit more in the media that, and I guess enough lines have been crossed, enough time has passed. The tragedy is immutable and sufficiently unpreventable enough that now the mainstream media is willing to talk about it. But real quick, to address what Emma Vigeland said about Hakeem Jefferies, she's 100% right that this, posturing that he's doing in order to, Zohran Mamdani has people in Hakeem Jefferies' district to answer to. And it's Zohran Mamdani blew Cuomo out in your district, bro. So if anybody has to answer to those voters, it's you. Now, that was the Democratic primary, so I guess he could be gesturing to the idea that there's more conservative or moderate people that might be voting in the general. But still, he's a fucking Democratic elected representative. Those people that showed up and voted for Zohran in his district are the ones that are going to be showing up and voting for Zohran in the general election. That's just what it's going to be. So Hakeem Jefferies knows that's not a serious point. He's just trying to hold off, and he's trying to exert some pressure on Zohran because Chuck Schumer was successfully able to do so and leveraged him to kind of tamp down the use of the globalize the intifada phrase. And Zohran went on TV and talked about that a little bit. And so you do see the Democratic establishment exerting some pressure on him. But at the same time, I think there's a limit to how much he needs that. And the reality is, if he wins the general election without that, or if he gets like an endorsement, particularly from Hakeem Jefferies, and rejects it in some sense and still wins, it may create political complications for him, but it's also going to read as a mandate for the party. Now, the party doesn't like reading the mandates that it's given by the voters, but still, you know, Zohran is in a position to deliver that message, not just to the people, but to the Democratic Party in general. And I think that's inevitable. They are stalling. They're trying to get control of the narrative because they know that ultimately this politics that Zohran Mamdani is bringing to the table is going to win out, most likely. He hasn't won yet. We don't know what's going to happen, but the momentum is clear, and they are just trying to figure out how they can exert some leverage in the meantime. So to get to this split between Comcast and NBC Universal. So Comcast acquired NBC Universal in 2011, which included MSNBC along with other companies. So in the most recent iteration, you know, the past several years of MSNBC and other NBC programming, it has all been under the umbrella of Comcast. So that is the part that is changing. NBC Universal is splitting from Comcast. They're becoming two smaller companies. Some people are speculating that that is because of, you know, potential pressure from the Trump administration and the way that he is exerting pressure on different companies. If they are smaller, that makes them less vulnerable to that, especially because NBC separating from entities like MSNBC allows them to focus more on their like more right-leaning or centrist programming, whatever centrist means in, you know, current American politics. So MSNBC is going to remain under the umbrella of Comcast. And that is going to become a new company, a spin-off company, as they're calling it, called Versant, which is going to be run by Mike Lazarus. So MSNBC, as well as CNBC, are going to be splitting away from the NBC umbrella, and that is why the name change is happening. So MSNBC is going to become MS Now, and probably CNBC will get a name change as well. So the programming that's staying on NBC Universal is NBC Entertainment, NBC News, NBC Sports, Peacock, and so that's why they said that the Peacock logo is staying with that company. So Comcast is keeping MSNBC, but they're giving back some of that branding. And this is where the question arises of where is the programming going to go on a version of MSNBC that is not attached to NBC anymore? Because NBC was the larger news programming that kind of imposed certain strictures on a platform like MSNBC. And that's not to mention the fact that those pressures are now changing under Trump in terms of what he wants from the media landscape and how he's able to exert pressure to change the media landscape. So in a way, this is an example of the president breaking up a company without even having to do anything. Just the fact that he's leaning in that direction and this company doesn't want to be leaned on in that way, that is enough for NBC to want to break off from their more liberal programming. So it seems like the direction Comcast is going to go in is more like streaming and trying to sort of modernize the approach and get away from the cable approach. So that is pretty much the dynamic that we're seeing happen here. And I want people to understand it in detail, because this is kind of the opposite of what is happening with Paramount and Skydance. That's a big merger where they are trying to appease the president because they need his approval. This is sort of a company working in the opposite direction. This is a merger that had already happened, and now it's splitting. So it's not just a rebrand when it comes to MSNBC and MS Now. They might change their brand again, but they're not going to go back to MSNBC. So we'll see. They're going to do a big marketing push towards whatever their new outfit is, whatever their new logo is. And this is where, you know, having more genuinely progressive coverage and having people on who are willing to call a genocide what it is and, you know, spread the message that Democrats need to be able to do that as well. And that's the litmus test that people are using to decide if they can trust a politician. That's an excellent observation. I think that's becoming the prevalent knowledge. And it'll be interesting to see if this new entity that MS Now becomes is going to again skirt coverage like that and try to move away from it, or continue to embrace it because it appeals to a certain audience that that specific company is trying to embrace and attract by having people like Emma Vigeland from the Majority Report on. I guess I prefer MSNBC splitting off to become a more separate, independent entity to, you know, more corporate conglomerate merger clusterfucks. Although I'm sure there will be some inevitable downsides to this as well.